Alright folks, today I'm here to bring you the Savior story arc explained. The second of 3 videos in my Savior Saga. If you haven't gotten the chance, I'd recommend checking out Negan and the Savior's Origins Explained before watching this video, just to get you fully caught up on how they rose to power. This video is going to be covering how our main group came into contact with Negan and the Saviors, how they lived under their rule, and how they rose up and marched to war, with the third and final video in the Savior Saga being All Out War Explained coming later down the line. If you're enjoying this type of content, be sure to hit that like button and drop a sub if you're feeling generous. The first instances of our main group encountering the Saviors comes while on a mission to lead a mega horde over 50 miles away from Alexandria. Daryl, Abraham, and Sasha find themselves in the middle of an ambush initially not meant for them, by men dressed in leather. Daryl is separated from the two and finds himself held at gunpoint by a man named Dwight and his wife, Sherry. Clearly the people the ambush was set up for. They are aggressive at first, as Daryl fits the MO of their attackers, but he can tell they are just desperate survivors trying to escape something bad. As the men close in on them, Daryl helps his captors escape despite their treatment of him, just to be thanked with a good old-fashioned robbery, taking both his bike and crossbow.
Fuck this guy.
Initially, this is believed to be a one-off encounter, but this won't be the last time we see Dwight and Sherry. Once reunited, Daryl, Abe, and Sasha begin their journey back to Alexandria, but are stopped by a roadblock. Judging by the leather attire and motorcycles, these are definitely the same guys from the ambush. The three are stripped of their weapons and held at gunpoint, but what distinctly sticks out to the trio is the phrase, "Your shit belongs to Negan," right before Daryl gets the upper hand, blowing up the entire gang. As far as they know, that guy was Negan, so from what they can tell, the situation was handled. Months would go by without another peep from this Negan, so our group would continue on with their lives, rebuilding after the mega horde tore through Alexandria in the No Way Out story arc. While out on a supply run to feed the safe zone, Rick and Daryl would literally run into contact with a man named Paul Rovia, or Jesus, as he's referred to by his colleagues. He doesn't appear to be hostile, but isn't exactly a friend either, as he steals the duo's truck of supplies meant for the hungry Alexandrians. After a cat and mouse chase, the supplies is lost in a lake, and Jesus is knocked out. Realizing he wasn't trying to hurt them, Rick elects to bring him back to Alexandria for questioning, as he appeared to be well-groomed and was stealing a community-sized amount of food from them. Here, the polite Jesus reveals their world is about to become much larger, as he comes from a neighboring community, a part of a bigger network named the Hilltop Colony, a farming settlement with a surplus of food meant for trading. Jesus' job was to do supply runs for the Hilltop, while searching for other communities to join their network, and Alexandria fit that bill. Although Rick is cautious, the pros of visiting the Hilltop outweighed the cons, especially in their time of need, so the group set out with Jesus in their company. It's a little strange a farming community would need to steal that amount of supplies from Rick and Daryl, but I'm sure they have their reasons. Along the way, Rick and co earn some brownie points by rescuing a trapped group of Hilltop residents inside a library, one of which being a doctor named Harlan. Another asset to them, as Maggie has recently discovered she was pregnant with Glenn's child. Oh, happy times. When arriving, it's clear the Hilltop residents are cautious of newcomers, but are vouched for by Jesus and Dr. Harlan. Opening the gates, Rick and co are greeted by a small yet valuable community, with plenty of space for agriculture and a large residential building known as the Barrington House. Great for visibility in every direction. Once inside, Rick can see the residents don't exactly appear to be thriving despite their food production. They seem scared and quiet, with very few residents coming out to meet the newcomers. But their leader, Gregory, doesn't seem to be bothered by anything one bit. Gregory was a scumbag leader, only really looking out for his own safety while taking credit for others' work in Hilltop's success. He was, for lack of a better term, a complete and utter coward, and that would soon get the best of him.
This card is useless.
During trade negotiations between Gregory and Maggie, we see exactly the kind of man he is as he disrespects her, while claiming Alexandria doesn't really have anything to trade them for. I mean, he kind of isn't wrong. But these negotiations would be cut short as a small group of Hilltop residents return with their heads low from a mission to Negan's compound.
Oh, shit!
A man named Ethan claims Negan killed 2 of their allies and took another hostage because this month's offering was light.
Interesting.
On top of the casualties, the man was asked by Negan to deliver a message.
Sorry.
Gregory is rushed into Medicare as chaos erupts between Rick and the Hilltop residents, resulting in the death of the would-be assassin at the hands of Rick.
What?
Obviously, this is not a great way to start out negotiations for trade. It's a good thing they rescued those residents along the way, or they probably would have been kicked out right then and there. But it made one thing clear to Rick and co. These people have a bully problem, and our group are quite familiar with dealing with these kinds of people. In fact, they've already dealt with these exact people on the road and won. So what can Alexandria offer Hilltop for trade? Strength. Jesus fills the group in on Hilltop's situation, which we should be familiar with by now. One day, a group of men arrived calling themselves the Saviors. Demanding half their supplies, they would kill a teenage boy as a scare tactic while making the docile community watch in the name of Negan. A man everyone has heard of, but nobody at Hilltop has actually seen in the flesh. Since then, they've come back every month demanding half of whatever they've grown or found. If that's not enough, well, we know what happens when it's not enough. The Saviors wanted Gregory's head as an apology for the light drop, and in return, they would get back the hostage they took. This shows us how easy to work with and understanding they are. The people of the Hilltop have never seen more than 20 people at a time, so Rick and co are confident they can take care of these Saviors just like before, in exchange for a similar deal. Half the Hilltop's goods. Gregory, still recovering from his injury, accepts the terms of the deal and work begins. Now, the introduction of the Hilltop is pretty comic accurate, but there are a couple changes that I think actually work in the show's favor. The biggest one being the size and the scope of the Hilltop. In the comic, it's much larger and has a population of over 200 survivors. It's a hustling community, and at times you kind of forget the Saviors even have influence there. While in the show, it seems a lot smaller and less populated. The residents within are quiet and barely approach our survivors on their first visits. The Saviors seem to just have their foot over the Hilltop a little more than in the comic. And I think it's cool because it shows what Alexandria is to become in Season 7. One of the Hilltop residents, a part of the previous group of runners, Andy, draws up a map of the compound they dropped their offerings to. With a decent gauge of the facility, Rick is confident they can take everyone out at the outpost through stealth, but they would have to do it at night and get the door unlocked first. That's where Gregory comes in. Kind of. The Saviors wanted Gregory's head, so they'll get it. Or at least a walker with a similar look to him. The plan is to surround the compound in the dark. Andy will deliver the head in exchange for their friend held hostage, in which they'll then take out the guards and steal the keys, giving them full access to take out the sleeping Saviors stealthily before securing the armory. It's a pretty hardcore plan even for Rick, and it goes off without a hitch. Until it doesn't. Bullets begin flying on all sides as our group rushes to acquire the armory before the Saviors. Some of our survivors are forced to kill for the first time in the chaos. Even Father Gabriel gets in on the action. But our group is successful and take out the remaining saviors at the outpost, except for one, who attempts to escape on Daryl's stolen bike. Luckily they stop him, as they're gonna need him as a bargaining chip.
We've got a Carol and a Maggie. I'm thinking that's something you want to chat about.
While watching on the outskirts, Maggie and Carol are taken hostage by a splinter group of saviors. But this is Carol we're talking about, so sure as shit, before long, she burns them alive. But it's clear, between this event and the wolf invasion earlier this season, all the killing is starting to take a toll on her. With the outpost cleared out, only one question remains. Which one of those cold bodies was Negan? With their friends freed, their hostage quickly realizes they have no purpose for keeping him alive, and says possibly the dumbest thing he could say in the situation if he wasn't trying to get himself killed.
I'm Negan, shithead. I'm sorry it had to come to this.
As previously mentioned, most of the communities under the Savior's rule had never seen Negan in the flesh. So as far as everyone could tell, Rick and the gang did it. They freed the Hilltop from their tyranny. Yeah.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
Holding up their end of the deal, the Hilltop supplies Alexandria with as much food as they can bring home, and our group sets off with some new allies. A new day begins in Alexandria as the residents admire their now fully stocked shelves. Morgan disapproved of the Outpost massacre, electing to construct a prison cell in protest, as he believes they can be better than that in the future. Finally, at a time of peace, Alexandria's Dr. Denise asks Daryl and Rosita to accompany her to an apothecary nearby in hopes of finding some leftover drugs. Meanwhile, Abraham accompanies Eugene to an industrial machine shop, where Eugene claims with the right resources, he may actually be able to use this facility to manufacture bullets. However, he offends Abraham with his big mouth, causing him to storm off, leaving Eugene alone to fend for himself. After raiding the drugstore with a very messed up story behind it, Denise risks her life for a single can of pop. Daryl scolds her for doing something so stupid, but Denise finally stands up for herself, proclaiming she thinks Daryl and Rosita are really good people and they just need to wake up. Denise is murdered in cold blood by a bolt intended for Daryl. On the other end of that bolt was Dwight, the man who robbed Daryl earlier that season. Except this time, Dwight is with the Saviors and has a distinct burn on the side of his face, the sign of a savior that broke Negan's laws. On top of killing Denise and ambushing them, Dwight has Eugene held hostage. What do they want? Alexandria's location. Spotting a hiding Abraham in the distance who followed them ready to strike, Eugene takes the opportunity to bite Dwight's dick as a distraction.
Huh?
The Saviors retreat, but blood has already been spilt. Denise, their only doctor, is dead. And the Saviors are not only still active, but hunting Alexandria as well. They didn't get them all at the outpost. Instead, they just royally pissed Negan off. The positive mood across Alexandria is quickly diminished as news spreads. Some, such as Abraham, seize the moment of uncertainty to profess his love for Sasha, but others, like Carol, can't handle the weight of the oncoming fight, and in the dead of night, she flees Alexandria. The next morning, a panicked Rick sets out after Carol with Morgan, as this is no time to go rogue with the Saviors in the surrounding area searching for Alexandria. Along her travels, she encounters some Saviors and is forced to gun them down, once again, showing us they are closing in on the safe zone, and it's only a matter of time before they show up at the gates. As Carol sets off away from the bodies, one of the Saviors survives the encounter and begins tracking her. Coming across the scene and following the trail for a few miles, Morgan vows to find Carol as Rick needs to return to Alexandria in case the Saviors find them. So Rick returns, while just about every other character leaves the safe zone simultaneously. Daryl is out on a revenge mission for Dwight, under the guise of retrieving his bike from Denise's murder site. Glenn, Rosita, and Michonne set out after him to bring him home, as not only is Daryl family, but he's also one of the greatest assets in a battle. Although they catch up to him, they face the inevitable when wandering recklessly into Savior territory, and all four are captured and taken hostage, with Daryl taking a bullet to the shoulder to weaken him.
You'll be alright.
Alexandria is now in a state of Cold War. The enemy could be watching them as they speak. They have no idea how many there are, and to state the obvious, Rick and co kind of drew first blood on this conflict. Although it would have been inevitable the Saviors would find them regardless, but to expect mercy would be foolish. Michonne, Glenn, Rosita, Daryl, Morgan, and Carol are all out there in unknown states. So for the love of God, nobody else leave Alexandria. Ah, shit. Now, it's a little unclear what exactly happened to Maggie here, but regardless, Alexandria no longer has the doctor to help her, leaving Rick and co with no choice but to head back to the Hilltop. Safety in numbers, right? Well, it seems that is exactly what the Saviors wanted, as no matter the direction they choose to take,
Simon, the Savior's second-in-command, will be waiting with a roadblock for them.
these encounters are tense but non-hostile, as it seems the Saviors are trying to lead them somewhere. But how did they know where they were going? Do they have spies? It makes the Saviors seem like they are always 4 steps ahead of our crew and have eyes everywhere. Could they have somehow poisoned Maggie? That's the horror of the Saviors. Sowing paranoia to the point where even naturally occurring incidents would be seen as a terror act from them. Every main road and every back street would lead to a roadblock, larger and more aggressive with every encounter. It's clear they are being herded like cattle, but Maggie is their most urgent priority at this time. So Rick comes up with the ingenious idea to head to the Hilltop on foot carrying Maggie, as Eugene volunteers to make a sacrifice in leading the Saviors astray in the RV. A far cry from the cowardly liar we once knew him as. Through the darkness in the woods, the group struggles to find their way to the Hilltop, but it appears the plan worked and they duped them.
Go! Go!
From every corner of darkness screams the horrific sound of the Saviors as our group is pushed deeper and deeper into the woods, before arriving right where they want them. With Eugene already captured, they never really stood a chance as the Saviors knew exactly what was happening. But no matter how they got there, they were now completely and utterly at the Saviors' mercy. Surrounded by at least 50 men on all sides, Simon demands they get on their knees, as there is someone who really wants to meet them. Out of a nearby truck, Michonne, Rosita, Glenn, and Daryl are dragged out and lined up all the same. Everyone is here, so it's time for our group to finally meet the man himself.
Missing our pants yet?
As mentioned earlier in this video, Negan preferred to operate from the shadows and leave the dirty work to his lieutenants, only appearing in the flesh when dealing with particularly stubborn groups, and Alexandria fit that designation, as not only did they take out a band of Saviors on the road, but murdered an entire outpost in their sleep. This dipshit obviously wasn't Negan. just a savior calling himself that like any other, as Negan instilled a cult-like worship of himself among his followers, and used it to create a sense of unity.
I am Negan! Damn right you are! We all are!
From Negan's perspective, Rick was the psychopath who snuck into his house and killed his people in their sleep. Rick needs to understand how completely and utterly screwed he really is. Negan proceeds with the classic "you provide for me" spiel, letting Rick and the Alexandrians know their way of life is over, and they now work and provide for him and his saviors. Negan doesn't want to kill them, as we know to him people are a resource, and they can't exactly provide for him if they're dead, but they killed a lot of his people. And an act like that against the saviors cannot go unpunished. So,
I'm gonna beat the holy hell out of one of you.
At this point, the true evil of Negan and the saviors is on full display as he taunts the group in their most terrifying moment. Some lash out in distress, but Negan makes it clear that shit does not fly. But who would get the honor of taking one for the team? Negan simply can't decide. So in a sick act of torture, he elects to play a game of chance.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
With a smile on his face, the power of judge, jury, and executioner is in his hands. And despite the dramatics and the games, he makes a choice. The world goes still as Abraham accepts his fate, knowing at the very least, the people he's grown to love as a family would make it out alive. Everybody is left in a state of shock. Locking his eyes onto the mortified Rosita, Negan would lay the blood-soaked Lucille in front of her eyes and demand she look at it to honor the man who just gave his life for them. Unable to bear the torment on behalf of his friend, Daryl would make the fatal decision to take a swing on Negan. Let me remind you,
That is a no-no.
Abraham's death just made them rageful, not scared. No, it wasn't enough. They were still full of defiance. And we know Negan can't have that in his society. Oh no, no. So in the moment that would change the public perception of The Walking Dead forever and begin the decline of viewership across the franchise, Negan would declare,
I need you to know me. Back to it. Seems like you're trying to speak.
In The Walking Dead's most tragic death, Glenn Rhee would be beat down in front of Maggie, his pregnant wife. This would leave the group utterly traumatized, a heart as pure as Glenn's, ripped out of this world for no reason. The only sounds to be heard is the sobbing of the remaining survivors, except for Rick, who still hasn't gotten it yet.
I'm gonna kill you.
2 heads wasn't enough for him to understand. He is at Negan's mercy, and this is the way it's gonna be from now on. So to prove how serious he really is, he demands Rick use his hatchet to chop off his son Carl's left arm. And finally, in the moment, Rick Grimes understands. There is no way out of Negan's world. He and all his allies now work for him. In hysterics, Rick picks up the hatchet and goes to fulfill the madman's demands. But in some weird spin on the story of Abraham from the Bible, Negan stops him at the last second as he sees Rick now gets it.
You provide for me. Provide for you. You belong to me.
And with that, our group's way of life is changed forever. They would not only have to keep themselves alive, but provide for others as well, with the threat of death looming over them if they refused. This is the true way the Saviors operate across the wasteland. Our group, like so many before, are left in complete shock and distress. And to add insult to injury, Negan takes a liking to the aggressive Daryl
and loads them up into a truck to take back to their base of operations.
Think of him as the group's first offering. This is life under Negan's rule. And for the first time in a very long time, Rick Grimes was broken. But the sun shines on a brand new day. And with Negan set to arrive at Alexandria in a week for their next offering, it was time to get to work.
Ta-ta.
Alright, now that everyone's nice and depressed, I'd like to take a second to talk about how I think the show kinda shot itself in the foot here a little bit. The big elephant in the room is the cliffhanger. The season 7 premiere aired 7 months after Negan killed the cameraman. By that time, it had already been spoiled everywhere who died. And that's because there were no precautions taken when filming the season. So quickly, outlets figured out that Glenn and Abraham were not on set past that first episode, and people were spoiling it everywhere. Completely unrelated videos and topics would have comments talking about how Glenn and Abraham are the ones who die. It was pretty ridiculous and one of the worst kept secrets in TV history, in my opinion. But there were consequences to this cliffhanger, as they already tried something like this earlier that season with Glenn in the dumpster, so trust had already kind of been broken with the audience. Not to mention, Abraham's death was completely overshadowed by Glenn's. And like how Kirkman said years earlier in an interview, Abraham could have been great for All Out War. So most run in the assumption that he would survive to that point. But unfortunately that wasn't the case. And I think that's pretty ridiculous because he didn't even get to use the rocket launcher he got. I mean, for real, like, they even made a figure of him with it and he doesn't actually use it. Daryl does twice. I don't know, I thought he was set up to be a great character in the war, but I guess AMC had other plans. But with that being said, it's time for us to take a look at what it looks like for the Alexandrians to be under Negan's rule and producing for the Saviors.
The week following the lineup would be a time of mourning for our survivors, but also a time of hard work, as Negan is set to arrive at Alexandria in a couple days, and the last thing they need is for the offering to be light. So Rick and co would do their best to scavenge for supplies, but some, such as Carl, would refuse to provide for them out of anger. Daryl would be taken back to the Sanctuary, an abandoned factory used as the Savior's main base of operations. With walkers strung along the fences, the Sanctuary would not only be intimidating for wandering survivors, but a camouflage as well, as the smell protected it from the walker buildups. Inside, Daryl would be locked away and fed dog food from Dwight, who has basically taken to being his personal bully. Negan wants Daryl to join the Saviors and call himself Negan. But of course, Daryl refuses, as rage for Glenn and Abraham continues to boil inside of him. So, it's back to the closet. But while being paraded around, Daryl would see life inside the Sanctuary is not the paradise Negan made it out to be. Workers incapable of combat would work on the factory floor on an unfair point system, used for purchasing medicine or food rations. When desperate enough for meds, certain women on the floor would be selected to become one of Negan's wives, as he believed he didn't need to play by the same rules as the old world. But we know there's more to that story than he lets on. With no other options, they would be coerced into saying yes. However, if you were to become a wife, there would be no going back. You could not go back to your original partner, and if you did, the man would receive a burn from a hot iron, half the size of their face, scarring them for life as someone who broke Negan's rules. This is what happened to Dwight and Sherry. They would flee the Sanctuary to get away from Negan's tyranny, but would be caught shortly after robbing Daryl. Dwight was to be executed for their betrayal, but Sherry would offer to marry Negan in exchange for his life. But Dwight would still receive the iron. Now, it's a little unclear what would have happened in between our meetings with Dwight for him to suddenly become one of Negan's top lieutenants, but my guess, it was to keep him close for Negan to torment further for trying to escape. Dwight would become Negan's punching bag, taking all kinds of abuse from him, but eventually, everyone has their breaking point, and Dwight would soon be the guy Negan pushed too far. Over near the coast, Tara, while out on a 2-week supply run, is separated from Heath, and comes across a community known as Oceanside, a settlement exclusively made up of women. Back in the day, Simon had arrived at their gates, demanding they provide resources for them. When they refused, he would murder every male in the village, causing the women to hide and stockpile weapons out of fear. 2 years later, they would be rediscovered and almost kill Tara to keep their secret. But she would barely escape with her life with the help of Cindy, the elder's daughter who doesn't agree with killing all outsiders. Oceanside wouldn't come into play until a little bit later into our story, but their early introduction shows us communities all over the place have been terrorized by these saviors. Heath would go missing on this run and would never be seen again, and Tara would return to the news of her girlfriend's death, Denise. Anger would begin to build up in Tara, but she would keep the secret of Oceanside's armory until the time to rise up came. Approximately 1 week after the lineup, Negan would show up at Alexandria's gates for the Savior's first offering. Or second if you count Daryl as the first. Rick would be forced to open the gates without hesitation, but the sickest part, Negan makes Rick hold Lucille, while parading around Daryl like a dog.
Man, that's messed up.
Negan is given a tour of the safe zone and wastes no time taking half of what they have. Not the stuff they scavenged and put to the side for them. Half of everything. Even Rick's iconic red machete. Half is what Negan decides is half. Rick understands what he has to do now, but the hardest part is convincing the others not to fight back. Especially when it's discovered the Saviors are only taking some of their stuff to burn it right after. These assholes.
Hot diggity dog!
Maggie had reached the hilltop with the help of Sasha following the lineup.
She suffered from placental abruption,
a separation of the placenta from the uterus, but would recover fine with no harm to the baby. However, Dr. Carson advises she stays at the hilltop for the duration of her pregnancy. She would bury Glenn inside the hilltop walls, and instead of burying her head in grief, she would get to work, finding ways to be useful to the farming community. However, Gregory refuses long-term asylum for Maggie, fearing the Saviors would punish them for harboring someone from the satellite outpost massacre.
You, sir, are an asshole.
But that night, the Saviors would drop by and dump a bunch of walkers into the hilltop's entrance, just to remind them of what's out there and what they are protecting them from. I guess. Maggie, Sasha, and Jesus jump into action, saving the people of the hilltop, and showing them there may be better leadership options than just Gregory after all. But Maggie can't be seen at the hilltop, and as Simon drops by, just to make sure Gregory is still in line, Jesus threatens to reveal Gregory's involvement with the plan to the Saviors if he gives them up. So, Gregory is at a stalemate, and for the time being, grants asylum for both her and Sasha. But you see, as the Saviors are leaving, Jesus uses the opportunity to sneak onto their trucks to track down the sanctuary. But who does he find also on the truck? Carl fucking Grimes, who made his way over to Hilltop on a solo assassination mission for Negan. Jesus is duped by Carl into jumping out of the truck, leaving him alone to start gunning down saviors on the inside of the sanctuary's fences. Despite killing 2 of his men, Negan doesn't have Carl killed. And also Carl doesn't just take the opportunity to shoot him, but whatever. Instead, he wants to show him around the sanctuary, where Carl would learn just how much of a tyrant Negan truly is, as he watches the factory floor workers kneel to the madman. Negan is a lot of things, but in his words, he is not a child killer. So, he elects to bring Carl back to Alexandria himself.
No hard feelings.
Arriving back at the safe zone, Negan cooks spaghetti in Rick's kitchen, as he waits for him to return from a supply run.
That part's not really that important, I just thought it was funny.
In this time, Spencer Monroe, an Alexandrian resident, has the ingenious idea to ask Negan to overthrow Rick and put him in charge of the safe zone. Needless to say, Negan doesn't like this idea one bit, as Rick is out there swallowing his pride to provide for him, while Spencer is cowering away behind the big walls, asking Negan to do his dirty work for him. And so he declares,
You got no guts.
Spencer is gutted in the street, and as a knee-jerk reaction, Rosita fires at Negan, missing him, but shooting Lucille, his beloved bat. Once again, Negan needs people to be scared, not angry, so he has another Alexandrian killed in cold blood, Olivia. Finally arriving back to the safe zone, Rick watches as Negan determines the bullet that was used to vandalize his beloved Lucille was homemade, and promptly had Eugene the bullet maker taken back to the sanctuary as well. That is now 4 lives taken and 2 friends kidnapped by the Saviors, and it has barely been 2 weeks. With this visit, Rick is finally convinced, no matter how hard they work for him, more and more of their people are going to die, as a tyrant like Negan will never truly leave them alone. So it's time to rally the troops. Over at the sanctuary, Daryl is slipped a key to escape by Sherry, who can no longer bear life under Negan and flees without Dwight herself, leaving Dwight to wonder what he truly values in this world. Fighting his way out of the factory, Daryl makes his way to the Hilltop, where he is reunited with the now optimistic Rick. Ready for what's coming next, Jesus reveals there is somebody he wants Rick to meet, as the time to march to war has come.
One of the biggest differences in this arc compared to the comics is Rick, where in the comics he's never really broken the same way. He plays the parts so everyone else is in fear, but secretly he's developing plans to strike back the entire time. This is not the case in the TV show. Rick is broken, and it takes half a season of terrorism from the Saviors for him to rise up. It's quite a big change, but I think it makes this scene all the more worth it. So our group is ready to fight back, but they have 2 major roadblocks: a lack of people and a lack of weapons. So let's take a look at how our group prepares for war.
Following Morgan's departure from Rick, he would discover a wounded Carol seconds away from death, as the Savior who survived her attack had found and shot her in revenge. With no other choice, the all life is precious Morgan is forced to gun the man down to save her life. Drawn to the sound of the conflict, an armored man offers to help the two, taking them back to the Kingdom, an allied community of the Hilltop, a part of the trade network. Here, they are introduced to King Ezekiel, a man who literally roleplays being a king, with his followers playing the part of knights. Oh yeah, Ezekiel has a tiger.
He may be a little corny, but he cares for his people deeply.
The two are welcomed with open arms, with Ezekiel taking a liking to Carol in particular, but she decides to continue with her original plan
electing to move into an abandoned house on the kingdom outskirts, alone to escape the death all around her. Morgan chooses to stay inside the kingdom walls, getting to know some of its residents, such as Ben, a young man looking to be a part of Ezekiel's army, and his young brother Henry, who Ezekiel sees as a son. This place seems to be a paradise, but of course, a community this nice also has a savior problem. But the difference is, the kingdom's deal is done in secret, away from the general population of the community. This was because they got one of the less trigger-happy lieutenants assigned to them, Gavin, who doesn't enjoy violence and would rather pick up their offerings peacefully. That being said, he is still a savior lieutenant and would kill if it was necessary. Ezekiel has an extremely tight-knit community, so the loss of any life to the saviors would be unacceptable, so he would allow them to walk all over the community with no opposition, as long as his people were kept unaware. So when Jesus takes Rick Grimes to meet Ezekiel in hopes of convincing him to join their war cause, he denies. However, some within his ranks, such as Richard, would soon take heavy opposition to this decision, and Morgan, although glad to be reunited with the gang, is gonna be forced to make a decision on where he stands on taking life sooner or later. Rick and co are sick of being under Negan's rule, but with the lack of people to fight and a lack of guns to fight with, they were back to square one. The kingdom, while sympathetic to their cause, was a bust, and Gregory, still angry about the satellite outpost failure, denies them soldiers as well. So where are they gonna get more fighters? Well, very conveniently, Gabriel is kidnapped from Alexandria in the middle of the night by a third party, separate from the Saviors or any group we've met thus far. Tracking them down, Rick and co discover a group of people that live in a dump and talk like fucking cavemen.
Tamiel, Brian, show Rick up.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
This whole subplot is just so weird. But they are taken in and Rick is forced to fight an armored walker as some sort of trial. After showing his strength and overcoming the beast, Gabriel is returned and Rick brokers a deal with the scavengers' leader, Jadis, to help them fight in exchange for a share of the Savior's supplies after the war is over. Although we know how important Jadis would be later on, for now, I'm still just gonna call her Weird Trash Lady. Back over in the kingdom, Richard is beginning his plan to force Ezekiel into the war by sabotaging the offering to the Saviors. Hiding a single cabbage, Richard expected to give his life for the cause, but instead, the young Ben would be shot in the leg instead. Rushing him to Carol's house, he would die on her table. So much for escaping all the death. Richard would confess to Morgan his botched plan, and at their next meeting with the Saviors, Morgan would strangle Richard to death and expose his plan in order to give the Saviors a false sense of loyalty.
Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?
He would later tell Carol of all the deaths under Negan's rule so far. Running away didn't keep it away, so finally snapping out of it, Carol would march down to the kingdom to let them know it's time to fight. And with Ezekiel grieving the deaths of both Ben and Richard, he was finally on board. So they have the people, but the issue of no guns still remains. Hey, guys, by the way, I've known a place that has a lot of guns for like 3 weeks now. Oh, thanks for sharing, Tara. So like a bunch of terrorists, honestly. Our group ambush and fully disarm Oceanside, taking all their weapons in the name of freedom. Obviously, most of them still don't want to fight, but give up their weapons. It's not like they had much of a choice. Eugene has made himself useful by fortifying the fences around the sanctuary. Sadly, he shows us he is still a coward despite all his growth, as he vows loyalty to Negan, promising to start manufacturing his ammunition. Over at the Hilltop, the residents are just as sick of living under the Savior's tyranny as any, and begin to look towards Maggie as a leader who can make a difference. So despite Gregory's warnings, Hilltop would see its civilians take up arms and join the fight. With fighters, guns, and ammo stocking up on both sides, it's clear to all war has arrived. But what if this mass bloodshed could be prevented? Well, that is Rosita's thought, as she approaches Sasha at the Hilltop, asking her to join on a solo assassination mission for Negan, acknowledging they probably won't return alive, but his death may prevent all-out war, and in the process, avenge Abraham. However, while staking out the sanctuary, Sasha would separate herself from Rosita and charge into the factory alone. Naturally, she would be caught, because that really wasn't much of a plan, and she would plead with Negan to spare her friends' lives. Negan's all about not wasting resources, so he agrees to only kill one person as punishment. Sasha desperately asks Eugene for a weapon in the name of his past loyalty to them, but instead, Eugene supplies Sasha with a cyanide pill. It's not what she wanted, but if only one person has to die that day, she was gonna make sure it wasn't any of her friends. Returning from Oceanside, Rosita would inform Rick they have a visitor, Dwight, who is possibly sick of Negan's tyranny more than anybody. He drove his wife away and has beaten and bruised him relentlessly. He wants to see Negan die, and he's willing to become their man on the inside for it. Dwight has been an unrelenting asshole since his introduction, but if what he says is true, he could be the key to defeating Negan. And as his first act of building trust, he warns the gang Negan is coming with Sasha captured, and he is not happy. They now have the weapons and have the people to withstand an attack, so the time to call upon the troops has come. Dwight sets up a roadblock for the Saviors, buying Rick and co time to prepare an explosive setup with the help of the weird garbage people. But when Negan arrives at the gates, the C4 doesn't detonate. They've been double-crossed by the caveman garbage people, who Negan had tracked down and struck an alternate deal with. A better deal. Now Negan had came to deliver Sasha back to Alexandria, and he was gonna stay true to that. So in The Walking Dead's Weirdest Death, Sasha emerges from a coffin she chose to be transported in as a walker and attacks Negan, as she had swallowed the cyanide pill along the journey back. I think the writers wanted to adapt Holly's death from the comics here, but since that was already done with Connor and the Pirates in Fear Season 2, this was what they came up with. And this would lead into a short gunfight that would end with Rick and Carl captured and Negan alive anyway. Rick has pushed Negan for the last time. Now there is only one way he could punish him that would make him truly understand. Carl will face Lucille. Although Negan was all about not killing kids, so I guess the writers either forgot about this or came up with the concept later on when they needed him redeemed. But regardless, Negan goes to swing, but is interrupted by Tiger X Machina. The half season of recruiting has finally paid off as the forces of Alexandria, Hilltop, and Kingdom unite against the Saviors and Scavengers in the first skirmish of the war. Driving them out of the safe zone, optimism is in the air as the newly formed coalition now sees this is a fight they can win. If they stand together and plan tactically, they might actually be able to defeat the Saviors and rebuild the world into what it should be. But there is a long journey to go before they reach that point. But they have to reach it, or else their friends gave their lives in vain. And with Negan now having access to a bullet manufacturer, they would not take this revolution lying down.
We are going to war! Yep.
So one of the biggest issues I have with this season overall, without a doubt, is the pacing. It spreads out roughly 12 issues across 16 episodes, so that's less than one issue per episode. And it really shows by the time we reach the season 7 finale. And unfortunately, this trend of stretching out source material would continue into season 8. This season also suffers from introducing too many groups that aren't completely necessary to the story. I'm looking at you, garbage people. It made what is a tight story in the comics into a convoluted one. And possibly my biggest gripe with the season is only covering 1 or 2 character stories per episode. Not seeing Maggie until 4 episodes after Glenn's death is a really weird choice in my opinion. But that being said, it's not all bad. Negan is great, and it's a much better watch when binging it opposed to week, and the same could be said for season 8. But we will be covering those events a little down the line in the 3rd and final part of the Savior Saga in All Out War Explained. But that's gonna do it for today, folks. Thank you so much for sticking to the end of this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. This is a long story arc, so I'm sure there's a couple important things I might have missed. But overall, I think this is a pretty straightforward retelling of the events. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and drop a sub if you're feeling generous. Take it easy, folks.